Welcome to the Wild Type Podcast. I'm Lyssa Lizards.
I'm Neptune the Chameleon.
And we're your reptile girlies. This one's for the wild type of girls. All right, today we have a juicy topic.
Yep. Looking forward to this one.
Yes, but first, as always, please follow us on all the socials at the Wild Type Podcast. Leave us a review.
Subscribe, comment.
Yes.
Thumbs up.
I always forget the YouTube things because you're the YouTube girly.
I know. What do they say? Ring the bell. That's something I've never said, right? Like turn on notifications. I'm like, yeah.
You want to smash that subscribe button.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, thank you guys so much for tuning in, though. We have a very good episode. Take it away.
Yes, we are going to be talking about the common mistakes that we see new reptile keepers make.
Yes. And both of us have been in the hobby for quite some time, have pretty big social media accounts. So we get new questions
Constantly.
from new keepers all the time. Plus, we see all the things.
And I just find it important to note, at least for me, I've made a lot of these mistakes. Not every single one, but I made a lot of mistakes in the beginning too. So we all do it. We just want to talk about it to help set other people up for success better than we were.
Yeah. And if nothing else, you can be like, wow, I remember when I did that.
Right.
But, now this is where you are in your...
That's literally
your
me.
reptile keeping.
I'm
exactly.
Like, I screwed all of this up.
Exactly. Or maybe you're listening and you're going, oh, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to.
Yeah. And I hope that's the case. Like that's, the whole goal is like we want to help other people figure out the best way to care for their animals.
Yes. This is going to be a very reptile heavy episode. So if any of my non-reptile friends are listening right now, you just want to
feel free to skip this one.
Fast forward, skip this one. This is going to be a very reptile heavy focus. Yes. But I think the first one we should talk about is UVB. Because that's huge. Well, especially in recent years too, which is really interesting because I don't know about you guys, but I certainly have noticed I'm now in the camp of pretty much every reptile should have UVB lighting. Yeah. But then for anyone who's new to reptile keeping, like that wasn't always the case, right? Crested geckos don't need UVB. Yep. These animals don't need UVB. Leopard geckos, like there were and are so many reptiles that even 5 years ago, it was not common to see them using UVB. It was one of the perk. It was one of the selling points. 100%. This animal doesn't need a heat bulb or UVB bulb. I forget about that. Yeah. I mean, that was the thing with crested geckos. It was like, they're so easy. You just need heat, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Dang, I forgot about that. That's wild. But then like in the chameleon world, like that's not a thing. Not an option. I would say, and I'm sure there are more, and I'm actually going to say 3. There are 3 reptile species that like back in the day were like 100% you can't skimp on UVB. And that's chameleons, bearded dragons, and I believe uromastyx. Yeah, definitely beardies. I'm not familiar with uromastic care, especially they're a little less common a while ago where they were at. But yeah, I would agree with that. UVB for beards and chameleons has always been the case, but very recently we've seen it with other leopard geckos. I'm currently in the process of upgrading all of my snakes. I have 3 snakes. My yellow anaconda Tarzan already has UVB, but pretty soon I'm going to be adding it for my scaleless corn snake and my Hog Island boa. So a mistake we see new keepers make is just not using UVB at all. But then unfortunately you think you're using the right UVB bulb, but actually it's the wrong UVB bulb. The wrong percentage or the wrong bulb. And in the chameleon world in particular, we see this all the time. Like it's pretty well known that you need heat and UVB, right? Like that's standard, and but it's the compact. Devastating if you don't use the right UVB bulb for chameleons and beardies specifically. Yeah, it's not a nice to have, it's a have to have, and it's not you have to have UVB, you have to have the correct UVB. So I think it's becoming more common now, which is great. I would think so, yeah. I feel like it is. It wasn't common knowledge though, the difference between a compact and a linear UVB bulb. And for anyone that's hearing the word compact, what we mean by that is the spiral one. Yeah, the squiggly one. Yeah, the squiggly one, don't use it. If you're using it, throw it away. The round fixture. And whenever I make videos on UVB, I always emphasize on like the long linear. Yes. The one that goes across the horizontal one. Enclosure. Yes. It should be like 2 feet long. But then you get into the territory of a T8 versus a T5. So people use a T8, which is a long linear UVB bulb. And they're like, I'm doing it. And I'm like, actually. The output's so different. Yes. So. Yeah. And the T8s are just thicker, older bulbs, older technology. They're one of like the OG bulbs. But the T5s are much more efficient and penetrate much further
Totally.
into the enclosure. So research your species, make sure you're using the correct UVB bulb, make sure you're replacing your UVB bulbs regularly.
And just an important note, I know we kind of touched on it being, you know, detrimental, things like that. Just to be very clear, one of the main things that if you don't have the right UVB, it can easily cause metabolic bone disease.
Correct.
So I just want to be clear that that's one of the main reasons why UVB is so critical.
Yes, because metabolic bone disease is fatal.
Yeah.
Straight up. Like
it's fatal. It's not reversible. Once your pets have, you know, mushy bones, there's really not much you can do about it.
Yep. Yeah. So that's the first one we wanted to talk about was UVB. Yeah. What else is on your list?
Supplements.
Oh,
which also goes hand in hand with the UVB, which is why I wanted to talk about it right after UVB.
Yep, absolutely.
So oftentimes people will either do like too much vitamin D3, not enough vitamin D3, not even use calcium at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say this. A lot of people think supplements are supplemental, which they are. And then they get the idea that they're like a nice to have, like, oh, you know, twice a month I'll use this. Or like, I don't think I need it for my reptile. I'm like, no.
You absolutely do.
Every single time you feed your reptile, you should be using some sort of supplement, and it's going to vary from species to species. And so it's so important that you have a set supplement schedule that you're following. And like, I know you have a tracker.
Oh, yeah.
I have a tracker where we keep, you know, tabs on which days are
I've definitely fallen off sometimes when I get really busy and forget to track, but 9 times out of 10 I am tracking
now, right? Like
I've got it down solid. Yeah, I've got it down pretty solid.
I will say back in when I was first getting started, I had a whole like calendar like pinned to my wall, and I would write down like Neptune's poop, his supplements, shedding, how many bugs he ate.
I filled out that calendar for you and I pet that several times.
Yeah, absolutely. But you know, you get into your routine and like you do it enough times that you're like, okay, I know which days are my multivitamin days.
Right.
I don't need
especially like, you just kind of get used to, you know, certain weeks of the month, certain days. You're like, oh, okay, it's Monday, this and that. And so you get pretty used to it. But I will say my pro tip for keeping track of your supplements is a dry erase calendar. That's what I used for years. I'm using more of like a book now that I write it all down in just for permanent tracking. But the dry erase calendar is incredibly helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah. And too, like, supplements can get confusing. I feel like UVB and the supplements are the most confusing things. People can understand the concept of heat. They can understand the concept of what plants to use and substrate. That all makes sense when you're new to reptile keeping. But UVB and supplements is such a foreign concept. Because you look at other animals that you're keeping. If you've only had cats and dogs before or a hamster before.
And as long as you're feeding them, they're fine.
But you're not providing them with UVB. You're not providing them with powdered supplements on top of their bugs. So I feel like that's a really steep learning curve, but luckily there are tons of great resources out there. And the purpose of this podcast is not to give you guys a detailed supplement routine, but just recognize like, hey, maybe it's worthwhile to go and check out some good resources and just double check that your supplement routine is correct for your species.
Yeah, 100%. It's pretty critical. So
if we're talking about lighting, I think we also have to talk about red heat bulbs.
Yeah.
Why do those exist?
Dude, I literally don't understand. You can't give me a reason that makes sense. You cannot give me a reason that makes sense. And so for anybody who, you know, we're literally speaking to like new reptile keepers specifically here. So like, if you don't know what we're talking about, the red heat bulbs that are sold in every chain pet store ever and that are marketed as good for use at night because quote unquote, the reptiles can't see the red light. Wrong.
I don't.
Wrong.
There's two things that, like, and I'm so knowledgeable on chameleons and like barely know anything about other species. So correct me if I'm wrong. But like, I don't think there's many species that need heat at night. Like,
so that is I'm so glad you brought that up because that's something I wanted to mention because that's one of the biggest misconceptions is literally unless your house is getting into like the mid 60s at night, you don't need additional heat at night for like the majority of reptile species.
Right.
It's always important research your species. If that's not true for your species, this doesn't apply. But I would say I have owned 10 to 15 different species in my lifetime, and not one of them has been a species that requires heat at night.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Because like I was saying, I know chameleons benefit from the temperature drop, and a lot of people get nervous, and understandably so. Like, we don't like to be cold when we're sleeping, but it's so beneficial for their body.
I beg to differ. I like to be cold when I'm sleeping.
No. I'm like, I want to be a little snuggly.
Nah, I'm a good 68. I want to be like tucked in. She thinks
I'm getting
crazy.
goosebumps being cold just thinking about that.
I also have a husband who also likes it very
built-in
cold.
heater.
So
Yeah. No, I like it warmer for sure. But people get nervous, like, oh, I don't want them to get too cold. And like, I get that.
But what you have to remember, and what you just said, I think is another key point to this, is that the temperature drop at night is natural.
Yes.
They would have that in the wild.
Correct.
And like
they're not
I said,
sitting at 71.
No, at all times. Like,
entire
that's
time.
crazy. Like it's actually beneficial for them to get that temperature drop at night. And when I say temperature drop, I'm not saying dropping from 72 to 60 degrees. That's not okay. But as long as, like, for me, like, my house never gets below 68 degrees, and that is perfectly fine for every single one of my reptiles.
Yep. Yeah. And I will say chameleons can get down to the 60s.
Yeah.
Like, I would say under 50 would be probably too cold for them, but we'll get more into cold keeping later in this episode. But a lot of people use the red heat bulbs for nighttime, but I've also seen people use them during the daytime, like as their basking bulbs.
Yeah, no, I know. And I mean, so I will say, scientifically, I'm not 100% sure about like all the information here. There are like a lot of like rumors and things that say that like the colored red lights do actually hurt their eyes. I don't have any like 100% specific scientific proof to back that up. If anyone does, drop it in the comments. Happy to read it, all of that. Like, however, regardless of whether or not it hurts their eyes, what it does, using those red heat bulbs at night, it affects their natural day-night cycle, their circadian rhythm. And it would be like you sleeping in a room with a light on at all times. I mean, you would never get sleep.
You would want, total darkness at night.
And so that's the number one thing, is that it disrupts their day-night cycle, which just messes with their whole system, and it's not good. And the reason that happens is, regardless of whether or not they can see the colored light, they see light.
Yeah. But if we're going back to the daytime red heat bulbs, even that, I mean, they're wide awake, but even that is problematic. Yeah. And again, going back to chameleons, they are so dependent on color for their food, for communication. And so by having that red bulb, that disrupts that ability as well. So red bulbs are not a good option. Instead, use a white light that's producing some sort of...
Ideally, halogen bulbs are fantastic because they give off infrared A and all of that stuff. So that kind of lighting is ideal, but regardless, you should only be using like white light.
Yep.
So
no red bulbs here. Nope.
Yeah, that's a big one. Okay, my next one is bad substrate, and there are a number that we can list.
Oh yeah.
So my number one that I tell everybody never to touch with a 10-foot pole is calcium sand or Vita sand. It's not okay. However, don't get scared away from sand itself, because sand, when mixed into other substrates, is a great option.
I'm learning all the things right now. I know nothing about sand, so I'm like, ooh, sand.
Well, this is why we work, because I know all the other species.
Like, I don't know anything.
You know all the chameleon stuff. Yeah, but calcium sand in particular is really, really, really bad, because since it is made of calcium, it actually encourages the reptiles to lick it.
Oh, and then ingest it and then get...
But I will say, substrate in general, like loose substrate, doesn't cause impaction.
Yeah, that's such a common misconception. And maybe we should have an episode where we talk about myths in the hobby, because 100%. I feel like that's one, like, if you have loose substrate, like, your reptile's going to get impacted and die.
And that's literally information from like 10 years ago. Update your research, please.
Yeah. Like I said, I think that's a great future episode topic where we can talk about myths and how chameleons don't change colors to camouflage.
That too. That too. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's why calcium is so bad, because it actually encourages them to lick and eat it.
Right. We don't want that.
And then like 9 times out of 10, if you're using calcium sand, your husbandry is also not on point, and they're going to get impacted extra easily because it encourages them to lick it.
One I see all the time is reptile bark. I know that's something that we don't recommend in the chameleon hobby. Very similarly to kind of what you're saying, is like if a cricket landed on one of the pieces of the bark and then your reptile goes to try and eat it and ingest the bark, then that's another impaction risk and something we want to avoid entirely. Yeah.
And any colored sand, dyed sand, it can dye their feet. I personally made this mistake and used this with my leopard gecko for like 3 years, and the poor thing had orange feet. It was awful. I have so many pictures from way back in the day.
I did not know that.
No, it's awful. I don't even like to think about it because it breaks my heart because it was so not okay. But I didn't know any better.
Right. And this is the whole point of this episode, guys, is if we can call these things out and you're going, oh no, I'm using that. It's okay.
Just know you're not alone. I did it.
Just make the changes, right? And and then go from there. One we should talk about too is the reptile carpet.
Yep, that's a big one.
The bane of my existence.
I hate that stuff. I hate it.
And people use it because at least with like chameleons, like trying to absorb the water, right? Because you're like constantly misting down the enclosure and stuff. But there are such better options. And the last thing you want is this like soppy, wet.
Also, specifically with chameleons, your best option is nothing.
But people don't think of that as an option. They're like, I have to put something down there. Now keep in mind, if you're a new keeper who has 2 sticks, 1 plant, and spraying it 6 times a day, then you're gonna have water everywhere and you're like, how do I deal with all this? So reptile carpet, I don't know of any reptile who uses it.
And I'm telling you right now, if you are looking at me like I'm crazy and saying, but I wash it, it's totally fine. It washes. No, it doesn't.
There's so much better options. And that's the thing too. Like if reptile carpet was a superior choice, that's different.
Yeah.
But there are much better options that are safer, that are more natural, that are just lower risk. Because even if you are washing it every single time, like there is still an inherent risk that there's little poop particles chilling on that carpet, festering, growing
under the heat lamp.
Who knows?
Under the heat lamp, going up into the air, getting all nasty.
Yeah. Don't use it.
They're impossible to clean. And then for my side of things, this doesn't really apply to chameleons as much, but for my side of things, if you're using them for leopard geckos, African fat tail geckos, bearded dragons, stuff like that, their claws are getting stuck in that carpet and they have the potential to get pulled out.
Yep.
It's just not.
We don't want that. We don't want that.
There's
Keep
so many
your claws
reasons.
in your paws.
Yeah. Yes, I like
Should
that.
that be on a t-shirt too?
For sure. For sure.
Okay, so we've got substrate. What else do you have on your list?
Let's see. And this is one that I am very, very guilty of. Buying all of your bugs from chain pet stores.
And animals.
That's the biggest one.
Yeah. I think just chain pet stores, besides supplies, I think supplies are safe to purchase from.
They're getting a lot better. I will say, like the PetSmarts of the world in particular.
I saw an Arcadia bulb.
They sell Arcadia now. They sell Arcadia and they're selling bioactive stuff.
I'm so excited.
They're selling springtails. They're selling isopods.
I'm so excited. Yeah.
Like, I'm all for it. So it's like.
So dry goods, I feel like you can
fairly
safe.
Do. Specifically buying bugs from chain pet stores is something that I used to do pretty much all the time. Like, like back when we first became friends, like I would just run to PetSmart twice a week. That was like my routine. And I haven't ever experienced this that I know of because I do fairly regularly check my pets for fecal tests. But I've heard horror stories about people getting bugs with parasites in them. And their animal from, a chain pet store having that issue.
And buying animals from chain pet stores, I know of people who have purchased animals and they already have parasites.
Riddled. Yeah.
And it's just the most heartbreaking thing. It's just they're cranking out these animals and these bugs left and right. So the quality is not there. The genetics are not there. And a lot of people don't know, which is why it's such a common mistake for new keepers because they're trying to rescue the animal or they don't know any better. And so they're like, oh, bugs, I'll just buy these. Or, oh, a chameleon, a gecko, I'll just take you home.
I do want to touch on what you just said about rescuing it.
Oh, should we get...
We don't have to get deep into it.
Because that's a whole 30-minute conversation.
We do not have to get deep into it, but I just want to say rescuing them from a chain pet store is not rescuing them if you're paying for them.
Yeah, because, the business is getting money.
Yep. You're supporting it, and they're just going to continue selling live animals if you're supporting the sale of live animals.
Such a hard... I've made a video about this. I'm like, look, there's no right answer because you don't want that animal to suffer and realistically die.
It breaks all of our hearts.
Because if you leave, that animal is not living another week or two, right? Yeah. So it's okay, but then if you take them home, then it's just going to be replaced with another animal because then the business is looking, oh, look, we sold 6 reptiles this month. Let's throw 8 in the...
Basic economics, supply and demand, if there's a supply for it.
If they're moving out the door, they're putting new ones behind it, especially if they're making money from them.
Yeah.
I will say there are instances where there are severely sick animals at Petco, PetSmart, and they are true rescues because they surrender them to the person.
And if they surrender it, this doesn't apply. Like if they surrender it and if you're not paying money for that animal, that's a rescue, 100%.
But it's the instances where they're like, oh, they look so sad.
Yeah.
And sick,
I just had to take him home.
Lonely,
yeah.
And then they just, they buy them and then are ill-equipped. They don't have the correct enclosure or supplies. And then it's just a snowball of problems. But again, that's a whole nother.
I was like, we got to stop. That's
a whole nother conversation.
We could go on to that forever. But my next mistake, and this is one that is not necessarily new, but I would say is in the last few years becoming more and more prevalent, that I firmly agree with.
Can I guess what you're going to say?
Yeah.
Overhead heating?
Yeah.
Ew,
you knew it.
This is something that you feel very strongly
about this.
Yeah.
Because I have directly seen the impact and the benefits of my animals and how it has impacted them, providing overhead heating versus like under the tank heating. So that's what we're comparing it against.
That's the difference. Yeah. We're talking heat mats, which would be belly heat on the bottom of the enclosure, which was the standard.
Oh yeah,
for
absolutely.
Years.
Forever.
No one even considered overhead heating.
Guys, I literally have like 17 heat mats in my supplies closet because I have used them for so long and that I have so many.
And I think part of the reason why we've seen this development is because we've seen improvements in the enclosures.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these enclosures weren't even equipped to try and handle overhead heating.
And specifically with that, the under the tank heaters, the heat mats, if you're doing bioactive, they will not work. You cannot use them in a bioactive enclosure, which I think is
that's a good point too. Kind of a chicken and egg, multiple things kind of moving us in that direction. Because
the bioactive enclosures are becoming more and more the norm, or even just naturalistic at the very least, which I'm all for. The heat mats won't penetrate through all of that substrate, or even if you have a drainage layer for bioactive, it won't go through that. So they just don't even apply anymore.
So question for you, because I know trying to juggle a bioactive enclosure is a lot for a new keeper. Overhead heating is a lot for there's just a lot of moving parts. You're trying to get the basics. Would you recommend for a new keeper who maybe has got a ball python, their very first reptile, would you recommend they start out with overhead heating?
Oh, yeah. Yes. 100%. I would recommend starting out with overhead heating, but always keep a heat mat for like emergency situations if like you don't have a bulb or anything like that. But I recommend this for and this is a whole other episode topic about quarantining. So we will get into that another time. There are so many tangents that this episode could take that we're not going to let happen.
Stick to the script.
Stick to the topic. But basically, anytime you get a new reptile, you should always start out with them on nothing but paper towels. And that may sound harsh. That may sound kind of cruel. You want to put them in a beautiful, amazing enclosure. But the reality is when you first bring an animal home, you want to be checking for any medical issues. You want to be watching their poop meticulously.
Which is hard to do when there's a bunch of other factors or things inside their enclosure. We keep it sterile. We keep it clean. We make sure the animal is eating, pooping, shedding correctly, all these signs of a healthy animal. And then we can move them into their enclosures.
With that said, I would always recommend anytime you get a new reptile doing your bare minimum quarantine enclosure. We'll talk about the details of that another time. But in that quarantine setup, I would recommend using overhead heating so that you're starting off with the get-go with the right heating. And the reason, just to go into a little bit of like the reasoning, belly heat is great. Absolutely. And I know a lot of breeders will, preach that heat mats are better because of belly heat. That's fine. There is some truth to that. But the reality is belly heat in the wild comes from where? The sun. Above.
I was going to say, because if you have your overhead heating and you have those little like slate rocks that you like to use inside your enclosures.
Exactly.
Those get warm, nice and toasty. And then your reptile can go and just cozy on up against the little rock.
Slate is like the perfect heat conductor. It like absorbs so much heat. And so the reality is when you're using overhead heating and you have that basking spot directly on those little flat slate rocks, you basically get the benefit of belly heat and the deep heat penetration if you're using a halogen bulb or a deep heat projector, which is what you should be using, FYI. You're getting the deep heat penetration from above, but also from the belly heat. So they're getting the benefits of both.
Right. And again, the whole point of this episode is not to go into like the nitty-gritties of it, but more so let you guys know like, hey, these are things that we see from, keepers that were like...
And just trends in the hobby, because some of these things are in the last few years more of the norm than they ever used to be in the past.
Totally. Totally. One common thing I see all the time with new keepers is that they feed one bug, one type of bug. It's
and what bug is it?
Either crickets or mealworms.
Yup. I hate mealworms. I hate them.
Mealworms. And I'm like, and they're like, my reptile only likes mealworms.
I don't care. Get him off of the drug, friend. Get him off of the drug. They will eat other bugs. I promise you.
Yes. So I think this is twofold. One, there's just a lack of knowledge. People are unaware that there's other bugs because they are going to their Petco, PetSmart, and all they see are crickets and mealworms.
Yep.
Maybe a hornworm here and there.
But like one hornworm in one box for $5.
For $5. It's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous.
Crazy.
But anyways, so they just don't know that there are other bugs and that not all bugs are created equal.
There's so many bugs, guys. There are so many bug options, and variety is so freaking important for your reptiles. It's my favorite
when I get a comment on TikTok and they're like, what bugs can I feed besides mealworms? I'm like,
everything.
How much time do you have?
Everything.
And then I hit the character limit every time because I'm just listing off, especially with chameleons because they can eat flying bugs.
Which is super cool. That's one of my favorites.
You can do waxworms or wax moths. You can do hornworms or hawk moths. Like you can hatch everything into flies. So now you have 2 types of bugs in one.
Yep.
It's like BOGO. Buy one, get one.
There's a long list of bugs that you can use, guys. I mean, it is crazy. And variety is just so important for your reptile because they get different nutrients from different types of bugs.
It's so simple and so obvious because we are not over here eating just chicken and broccoli every single day. Like it's good to have that variety, especially not all bugs are as nutritious as others. There's treat bugs. Absolutely. There's ones that are higher in protein, higher in fat. So point of this, try and branch out, try some new bugs. And if your reptile is refusing to try those other bugs, like I have tips and tricks videos, you have tips and tricks videos, like there's ways to get them onto other bugs besides just their mealworms.
Specifically mealworms and waxworms, they are a hell of a drug, friends.
Oh yeah, superworms?
Yeah, those too. Yeah, they'll get addicted to those fast.
That's like candy.
Yeah.
Reptile candy.
Yeah, you got to be careful with those.
Yeah. So I know, I don't think we've talked about enclosures too much, but I know back in the day, like aquariums, like the fish hobby just kind of like encroached into the reptile hobby.
Well, I think because people looked at it and they're like, oh, a tank's a tank. Like, you know, and because even the front opening reptile enclosures, it still looks like a glass tank. And so people just assume that they're the same as like a fish tank.
Yeah.
And I'm guilty of this. Literally, I think we talked about it in the last episode, but when my dad got me Charlie for Christmas, he put him in our old fish tank.
Right.
Like he just thought it was fine. He was like, oh, we got a tank. Why would I buy another one? Yep. Which I get to some extent, but unfortunately aquariums just aren't as equipped for reptiles. They don't have the proper ventilation. They're usually not the correct sizes. Like there's just a lot.
Yeah, we didn't talk about this before, but I think small enclosures are also a mistake we see new keepers make. And I think again, it's just a lack of knowledge, lack of education, you know, maybe lack of resources because those larger enclosures do come with a hefty price tag on there. Totally. But it's better to start out with the correct enclosure, the correct size, save up your money, get the right thing from the beginning. So you're not having to double buy things, move your enclosure, like your reptile in between enclosures. And I
just have to say this, if you have any reptile or any amphibian, well, maybe not amphibian, but if you have any reptile in a 10-gallon tank, I'm almost 99% certain that it is way too small. Way too small. Just don't do it.
Yeah. So making sure that it's the right type of enclosure, that it's made for reptiles. And I'm going to put a little caveat on it. Just because there's a picture of a reptile on it does not mean it's suitable for a reptile. Yep. So make sure that that it's made for reptiles, but it's also the right kind. I'm just thinking of those stupid Thrive enclosures. Yeah. You know what I'm talking about? PetSmart. They're like a hexagon. Yeah. Why is that a thing?
I don't even know, man.
How many geckos and chameleons I've seen in there? I'm like, but then they slap. It's a picture of a veiled chameleon right on front.
And so because of the branding, because of the prep packaging, like people think that it's appropriate for that animal, and it simply is not.
Drives me nuts. Okay, I'm trying to think. Are there any other mistakes that we see often?
That is everything that I had on my list.
Okay, one thing I think we should mention to round it out is a lot of new keepers just are afraid to ask questions.
Yeah.
Or get help, right? Like we're trying to proactively tell you guys these things, but if at any point you have questions, you're like, I don't know what she means when she says T5 or vitamin D3. Like, please just ask for help. The internet is an amazing resource. The reptile community, there are some deep, dark corners on the internet, but for the most part, it is a really wonderful community. And if you're willing and wanting to make changes to your enclosure and to your reptiles' health and well-being, like there are people that will help you through that.
And I have to say too, just if you ever are asking the questions and you ever come across somebody who is unkind about it, please don't be discouraged from asking other people.
Right.
There are some people out there who, may not be kind about questions, and, to each their own, but don't be discouraged from asking other questions to other people. Just move on and find somebody else who is willing to be kind, because this is not something that anybody should ever feel guilty for asking questions about.
Yeah. And for any of the Chameleon listeners, I do offer one-on-one calls if that's ever something you're interested in, where you can chat one-on-one with me and like I will help you through that.
Right.
But there's also hundreds of videos, right? Like be proactive. You don't have to necessarily ask every single question. There are tons of amazing resources. And once you find a good one, stick with it.
Yep. Absolutely. That's super, super important.
Yeah.
But I think that covers our main topic for today.
Yep. I think so. I think we've given people lots of things to think about.
Lots to noodle on.
Feel free to let us know what maybe some mistakes you've made or things that you've seen or things you wish you would have known when you first got into keeping.
Trust us, we've seen it all. But always happy to hear, any new tips, any new resources. Like I said, we're open to whatever.
We have some very exciting news in the chameleon world. Our friend Bill Strand from Chameleon Academy is officially working with custom reptile habitats to launch a new line of arboreal cages.
With his 40 plus years of experience working with reptiles, we just know these new enclosures are going to be next level. The first cages in the Chameleon Academy line even have special features specifically for bioactive environments.
Both Bill and Custom Reptile Habitats are huge advocates for advancing reptile husbandry, so we are thrilled about these new enclosures. Visit chameleonacademy.com for more information.
We want to thank Josh's Frogs for supporting the Wild Type podcast. Josh's Frogs is an online animal and reptile supply retailer who you may see at your local expo. We always love stopping by their booth.
They only sell captive bred animals, and their sales support animal conservation and research. They offer a large variety of feeder insects for your pet reptiles and amphibians that will arrive right to your doorstep. A 3-day life insurance policy is included, making it so easy to feed your reptile nutritious bugs.
So if you're looking for some crickets, use code TheWildType10 to save 10% on any sized crickets from joshsfrogs.com.
Big thanks to Pangea Reptile for the support of the podcast. They're one of the leading companies for reptile supplies, lizards, and their world-famous gecko food.
They just released their brand new micro feeding dishes made specifically for baby or micro geckos. These smaller dishes can be mounted to smooth surfaces and even branches and will help stop your gecko from getting food all over their enclosure. If you own a gecko, you know exactly how nice it'll be to not have to clean food paw prints everywhere.
Head on over to PangeaReptile.com to check out these new micro dishes along with their other amazing products like their face packs for shipping, chameleon kits, and gecko food.
Our segment for today is actually going to be another tips from the pros.
Whoop, whoop.
So today, because it's December and we're getting into the nasty, drizzly, cold weather, I hate it. I hate it here. I'm a summer girl myself. I am so not a winter person. But we're going to be talking about how to keep your reptiles warm during the winter.
Yes, and this is so important. I know we were talking about how, yes, they need the temperature drop and do well with the colder temperatures, but there is such a thing as too cold.
Absolutely.
Now, these are animals that come from the desert, the rainforest. They're not coming from Antarctica.
They have no idea what it like if you live up, in north, or if you're in Canada, or if you're, that is so not the right environment for those animals.
Now, there's two things to think about when we're talking about colder temperatures in the winter, just like normal day-to-day temperatures, but then like natural disaster, like extreme scenarios when you lose power.
Absolutely.
So I think just as a general statement for like day-to-day keeping, one thing I see all the time is they're like, SOS, I live in Chicago. It's like 3 degrees outside. What am I supposed to do with my reptile? I'm like, what temperature is it inside your home? And they're like, 74. I'm like, then why are we talking about this?
You're fine.
You're not keeping them outside.
That's actually great. I've never had anybody say that.
Are you kidding me?
I mean, I have people say like where they live and like how cold it gets, but whenever I say as long as your house is like at a certain point,
But why are you asking me if you live in Antarctica? I'm like, as long as you're home, because you're not living in a home where it's 32 degrees inside.
And I will say, as somebody who recently moved into a 2-story house, maybe their reptile is in a space that like the heat doesn't get as distributed to.
But it's not going to be 30 degrees.
I know. I agree. That's a little crazy.
Like, I live somewhere super, super cold. Can I have a reptile? I'm like, does your home have a heater?
Yeah.
Like what temperature is your home?
That does lead us to our first tip, in my opinion, which is something that it is on my ultimate goal list in the next couple of years to get for myself, is to get a good backup generator.
Okay, but this is going into the emergency situation. I feel like just for regular keeping, one thing is just to have a higher wattage heat bulb.
Oh, absolutely. Because
even though, yes, it's not going to be freezing cold inside your home, odds are it will be a few degrees cooler in the winter time than in the summer. So you may need to bump up from like a 50 watt to a 60 watt heat bulb or something like that. So that may be something good to do. But I think beyond that, there's not a whole lot more.
No.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Then we can get into the emergency.
I was about to say, I was like, this mainly applies to emergencies, I feel like.
So this is instances where you lose power, right? Or your heater stops working. And you do have this animal who is dependent on having some sort of heat source. So you mentioned generator. That's huge.
I'm like dying to get one now that I'm in a house. I'm like, I need to have a generator backup.
And that goes both ways, right? If it gets too hot, like if your AC goes out,
that
right?
too.
And the temperature's creeping up and up and up.
And I have had that issue. I lived in a house with a roommate, and it was a 3-story townhouse, and our HVAC went out in August, in the hottest month of the year. Insane.
Yeah.
And we luckily had 2 HVACs. So the one on the first floor was working, but the one on the top the 2 and 3 floors was not working, which is where my reptile room was.
Yep.
And it was awful. I was so freaked out because I like didn't know what to do because the temps were getting increasingly higher and higher every day.
Right. You're like, am I about to pack up all my reptiles and take them to Walmart?
I mean, I would have, like I literally didn't know what to do.
Right. Like if power goes out, I'm like, right, everyone's got their to-go box and we're going to go chill at Walmart.
Yeah. We're just going to go hang out in my car, chill in a parking
that
lot.
Has air conditioning. Yeah.
It was, I mean, any emergency situation, if I've been in the too hot scenario and that's even harder in my opinion, it's easier to bring temps up than it is to bring them down.
Yeah.
So that is really tough. That, I would say just like have backup options for that.
Having a portable AC unit and a portable heater, right? Those little space heaters that you can just like throw in a room. And this is good because to your point, there are definitely rooms in a home that will be colder than others.
Yes.
Or maybe it, is getting in the 50s at night. Like that's not freezing, but that is a smidge chilly.
Still too cold, yeah.
Especially depending on what species you're keeping. But a portable, just a room heater would work. So you're not having to stress about, paying to heat up your entire home or cooling your entire home. You can just use a little space heater or, AC unit or something like that in that one room that your reptiles are in. So then you can monitor their temperatures.
Totally. But specifically for cold ones, so some of my tips, and I know these are, some of yours too, I always have hand warmers on hand.
Yep.
I always keep those. And just an important note, if you're ever using those for heat for reptiles, make sure that you're wrapping them in paper towels or towels because
they're not directly
the direct contact with the hand warmers, because it is an unregulated heat source. You can't, use a thermostat for a hand warmer. So you have to make sure that they're not going to have direct contact with it, which is important. But you can do that with hand warmers, or you can do it with reusable hot water bottles. Those are really key.
One thing I see with chameleons in particular, because they're in screen enclosures, that's really hard sometimes to regulate not only the humidity but also the temperature, right?
Absolutely.
Right out of the enclosure. So what you could do is wrap the sides of the enclosure.
I forget about that.
Yeah. So you're basically makeshifting like a hybrid enclosure. So you can just use like a shower curtain or a cool background or whatever. There's tons of different options and that can help.
I've even seen people wrapping them with saran wrap in real emergent situations, which is a little crazy.
Okay. I guess that could.
I mean, you have to take it off every time. So it would have to be a repeat thing.
Work. Yeah.
But I've seen that in like truly emergent situations.
Yeah. No, I would say most people just get like a shower curtain from the dollar store or something like that and just like wrap the sides of it. Mm-hmm. And if you're going into like the extreme scenarios, you could take like a blanket or a towel or something. Basically, you're just trying to hold in the heat so it's not escaping.
In as much heat and moisture as you can.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. So just be prepared and recognize that your reptile can probably handle it a little bit colder than you give them credit for. But
my rule of thumb for the most part, for at least most of the species that I keep, is if it starts getting under 68 degrees, then I'm kind of like, okay, I might want to, up the heat or, do something.
For me, the number is 60.
Yeah.
But I keep primarily.
I would say under 60
chameleons.
is like, for me at least, under 60 is like you need an option.
But if it's 60 degrees in my home, I'm having problems, right? Like I'm wearing 2 jackets, fuzzy socks, like hot cocoa. Like I am fully aware that it's too cold for me. It's
too cold for you. Yeah. For the reptiles.
Yeah. But I'm a big baby with the cold stuff. Don't mind me.
What's been have you ever had like a super emergency situation pop up?
Nope.
No?
Nope.
Okay.
All of mine have been.
I've been pretty lucky too. I would say my biggest risk was that summer that the AC went out.
But it was on my mind though, right? Because I'm like, okay, it's getting really warm outside. Yeah. Like people are losing power. So when people around me are losing power, then I get into I
start freaking out,
little panicky mode. Because I'm like, okay, I will be fine if my house is 100 degrees.
My pets won't.
But my pets won't. And so that to me is what. And so I kid you not, I'm like, okay, who do I know has AC? And this is, I only have 4 reptiles, right. So it's a little easier for me to like pack them up and move them if I need to. But
I had one time that we were just having like record low temperatures and people were losing power and it was getting really, really scary.
Yeah.
And I was dating my husband at the time and I literally had to tell him, I was like, and again, we were just dating. This was like, I think in our first year and a half of dating. And so I literally was like, I'm just warning you, if my power goes out, I am showing up at your door with like 15 reptiles. I'm so sorry.
No, it's definitely been on my mind, right? The extreme cold, the extreme heat. I do make sure that I have, things in place that like, I know I can try and help hold in temperatures if need be. And then in worst case scenarios, like where can I go to make sure that they're well taken care of? So it has definitely crossed my mind. And I have been in instances where that was a very real possibility. But hasn't actually happened.
That's
to me.
Exactly my situation. The only one I've had was the AC going out where I was like, I'm really starting to freak out. But then our landlord fixed it and it was fine. So.
Yeah. No, yeah. I'm with you.
Yeah. All right. Well, does that wrap up our segment for today?
That is a wrap. Yep.
Okay. Well, if we didn't list a pro tip that you have for wintertime, please tell us because there's, I'm sure, tons of other tips out there. Please drop them in the comments. Let us know. We would love to share more tips.
Absolutely.
So if you have any others, just let us know. But yeah, so our next episode next week, we're very excited. It's going to be how to name your pets.
Yes.
We both have different strategies for how we do that.
Yeah. Excited to
talk through.
Yeah, excited to share with you guys, a little story time on how we name our pets, and maybe we'll even talk about how we named the podcast, right?
Oh, yeah.
I think that would be fun to talk about. But thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe, give a thumbs up, follow us at the Wild Type Podcast on all things social media. You've got Lyssa's Lizards, Neptune the Chameleon. You can give us a follow as well. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for listening, watching.
Thanks for being here. We appreciate you.
Yeah. Otherwise, have a good day, guys. We'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye, reptile girlies.